American car companies have been giving up on sedans over the last few years, but the Japanese and Korean competition hasn't followed suit. Instead, they've decided to double down on sedans. So Hyundai has given us a new mid-size Sonata sedan last year, and for 2021, we're getting a new Elantra. This is currently the smallest sedan in Hyundai's North American lineup, and it's designed to compete very directly with the Corolla, which isn't terribly old, and of course the Civic, which is going to be completely redesigned next year. The Elantra is the first vehicle in the Hyundai lineup to get their new angular design theme. Now, the family of design, which they're calling sensuous sportiness, applies supposedly to this as well as the Sonata, but this is a very different look than we see in the larger sedan. Hyundai said that they don't want their vehicles to look like scale models of one another like we find in the European brands. They want them to look like part of the family, but they want them to have their own distinct style. Now, we are going to see this very angular design theme applied to the new Tucson coming up very soon. But as with their sedan lineup, the Hyundai crossover lineup is not going to look like scale versions of one another. The Tucson is going to have a design language very similar to this. The Santa Fe is quite different. And then, of course, the Palisade has that very different style Hyundai grille. The model I'm driving today is the Elantra Limited, so we have LED headlights. And you notice the turn signal is not inside the light module. It's actually right there inside the grille. At 184.1 inches long, the Elantra is now on the long side of the compact sedan segment. This is longer than the Corolla, the Sentra, and the Civic. And that has paid dividends when it comes to interior room, especially rear passenger accommodations. A lot of Hyundai's models were on the short side of their respective segments, but with their latest redesigns, Hyundai has decided to put their vehicles on the opposite end, somewhat similar to what we see Volkswagen. Even though the Elantra is a sedan with the traditional trunk, they've decided to style this a little bit more like a Sportback or a Liftback. And right back here we find one of the more controversial design themes. This particular design reminds me a little bit of my dad's 1980s Oldsmobile Cutlass Sierra. Not because it came out of the factory that way, but because he had his Sierra parked right behind his tractor and he accidentally backed into it with his rear bucket and did this sort of karate chop thing to the rear trunk lid. Let me know what you think about the style down there in the comment section. The style is a little bit controversial, but everything is executed very nicely back here. We have these LED accent strips that run from one side to the other. We do, however, have combination tail lamp modules, so not everything you're looking at here is an LED. This generation of the Elantra was designed to accommodate a variety of different drivetrains, from the fuel-sipping hybrid model to the upcoming high-performance Elantra N. This engine, however, is not that sporty Elantra N or even the N-Line model. This is the one that's most common on dealer lots. This is the 2-liter, 4-cylinder, naturally aspirated base engine. It produces 147 horsepower and 137 pound-feet of torque. Engine output is pretty comparable to the bulk of the compact sedans you find in America, but it is notably below the 1.5-liter turbo that we find in the Civic. In the US, this engine is mated only to a continuously variable automatic transmission. If you want a manual transmission in an Elantra, you can get one, but just not with this particular engine. Fuel economy ranges from 35 to 37 miles per gallon depending on the trim level you get. Because some trims of the Elantra do have an idle start-stop system, this particular model does not, however. And of course, the tire size changes as well, and that's why we have that variance in fuel economy numbers. Hyundai locates their trunk release differently in all of their vehicles. Some are a bit more disguised than others. Here we have just a simple button right there below the Hyundai logo. Behind this trunk lid, we find 14.2 cubic feet of storage space. That's pretty on par actually with the mid-size sedan segment, only slightly behind the average of the mid-size group in the US. And depending on the full-size vehicle you're looking at, this might be just 1 cubic foot less. That's why this scored the same 5 roller bag score in my 24-inch roller bag test as the Camry and Accord. Under the cargo area load floor, we have a huge spare tire well. This could very easily accommodate a full-size spare if you wanted to put one in here aftermarket, but from the factory, we just have this compact spare. Thanks to this generously sized trunk and enough room to accommodate a full-size spare tire right there under the load floor, I'm going to give this cargo area 10 out of 10 points in my exclusive trunk comfort index. My only complaint is that there isn't a helper handle to help you close the trunk lid. When it comes to front seat comfort, I'm going to give these seats 8 out of 10 points. I don't find these quite as comfortable as the seats that we see in the Nissan Sentra, although these seats are more adjustable than average. We have a powered 2-way adjustable lumbar support over here for the driver's seat, and the seat bottom cushion adjusts not just for height, but also for tilt. And that's something that is combined in a lot of the competition. We have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion, but even in this limited trim, which is the top-end version outside of the high-performance options, we still have a manual passenger seat. Even though Hyundai decided to style this a little bit more like a sportback than a traditional sedan, there's a reasonable amount of headroom back here. My head is touching the ceiling, but I can put my head right back there to that headrest. And there is a reasonable amount of headroom even for the center seat position, even though this bench is not really wide enough for 3 adults across the back. I could do this if I needed to for a trip for lunch or something like that from work. My head is definitely touching the ceiling here, and I really can't get it back there to the headrest, but sitting in perhaps a more natural position, this is something that I could do for a while. In a move that we're seeing from a number of car manufacturers, Hyundai is using a lot of fabric inserts, fabric right back there on those seat backs, right next to that hard plastic section, and then fabric over here on the rear doors to help dress up the interior. We see the same touch with the fabric on the front doors, which also has some added stitching, and then they've integrated that tweeter right there up on the front part of the door very nicely. Moving back from there, we find height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger and 2-way adjustable headrests. This vehicle does have the leather upholstery, but here again you can see that we have those fabric inserts right there on the back of that headrest and then on the back of the seat back. This leather upholstery is perforated, but the front seats are just heated, they're not ventilated. Above the driver and front passengers' heads, we have a pretty standard-sized moonroof with basically the same sort of controls that we find in the rest of the Hyundai lineup. Moving back down to the dashboard, we find a soft-touch injection-molded upper section of the dashboard. It has an interesting texture on it, so rather than simply looking sort of like a leather imitation or Naugahyde, it has more of a geometric pattern on it. We then have 2 large air vents over here for the passenger that are joined by some chrome bars that give it sort of an Audi 5000 vibe. Bearing in mind that the Elantra is a relatively inexpensive vehicle in base form, below that point we have a lot of hard plastics just as you'd find in the competition. If I pop open this glove compartment, we have a bin-style glove compartment. I was not able to fit a larger tablet computer inside. Depending on the trim of Elantra you get, you'll find 2 different infotainment systems in the dashboard. The base system offers wireless Android Auto and wireless CarPlay, but for some reason, the larger, just over 10-inch system that we have in this model does not yet. According to Hyundai, that may be available later via a software update, but they aren't giving us any details or specifics about that. With this generation of Hyundai's infotainment software, for some reason Apple CarPlay does not use the entire screen. One quick update here. There is a mode in Hyundai and Kia's latest infotainment system that allows you to use Apple CarPlay full screen. You simply go to Settings, Device Connections, Apple CarPlay, and then you can uncheck this Use Split Screen at Apple CarPlay screen, and then it will allow you to use that full screen format. That option didn't appear to be in this software in early pre-production versions, but it is there now. You can also do the same with Android Auto. If we go over to the Hyundai interface, you'll see that the icons are definitely very different than what we've seen in Hyundai vehicles before. With the latest generation of Hyundai's infotainment software, they've decided to give each vehicle a bit more of a unique feel when it comes to the infotainment software, even though behind the scenes, things are definitely the same. Moving down from there, we find a driver and passenger air vent, the engine start-stop button, physical controls for that infotainment system, that's really a nice touch there, the controls for the dual-zone automatic climate control system, this is also where we find the controls for the heated seats. Below that, we have a single USB input and a USB charge-only port, then a very large area where you could definitely keep some of those larger smartphones. I even had no problem fitting my large smartphone there with the cord connected. Continuing down from there, we find a drive mode button, a button for the rear view camera, a pretty traditional console shifter with a sport mode over here on this side, electric parking brake, and the auto brake hold enable disable button. A thoughtful touch is that on the passenger side of the center console, we have some additional storage areas right there. You could definitely keep a large smartphone in that little side pocket. Between the front seats, we find 2 large cup holders with an interesting divider system. These are really deep, so you can pull this out, rotate it around, and push it back in there, and then we get a shallower cup holder. You can see right now this is about 2.5 inches deep, and then if I pull that out and rotate it around, it pops all the way down there to its lowest position, and these cup holders become about 4.5 inches deep. Hyundai's decided to give this interior a bit more of a sporty vibe with this sort of divider between the driver and passenger-centric areas of the vehicle. It also sort of doubles as a grab handle there for the passenger. Moving back from there, we have a padded center armrest, and that opens to reveal a moderately sized storage compartment. It's only about 6 inches deep. With their latest refreshes and redesigns, Hyundai's going big on LCDs. So not only do we have that large available LCD infotainment system, one of the largest in this segment, but we also have this full LCD instrument cluster. The LCD is about the same size as the infotainment system, but obviously it's not a touchscreen. There are 4 different themes to choose from, and they can be linked with the drive mode. The animations are pretty decent, but we don't find the same sort of animations or customization that we find in luxury segment LCD displays. Still, this is definitely more snazzy than we find in the Corolla at the moment. This particular look is probably the most peculiar. The cubes pulse when the vehicle is in park, but if I put the vehicle in drive and start moving, you'll notice that the pulsation stops. The steering wheel is leather wrapped. It's one of Hyundai's new 4-spoke designs. We have some pretty aggressive sport grips up top. On the left side of the steering wheel, we find the buttons for the infotainment system. On the right side, we find the buttons for the adaptive cruise control system, the aggressive lane centering system, and then buttons that control that multifunction LCD. On the inside of this center section, we have a texture that's very reminiscent of what we see on the dashboard, but this is a hard plastic rather than a soft touch material. To the left of the steering wheel, we find the only thing in here that I don't really care for. It's this really odd wing on the other side of the instrument cluster. I can sort of see where Hyundai was going here because it mimics the style of the infotainment system that's over there on the right side of the instrument cluster, but in most versions of the Elantra, it does absolutely nothing. So this is not some sort of magnet charging disc. It's nothing other than just paint on plastic. Apparently, if you get an Elantra N-Line with the manual transmission, then we get a drive mode button right here in approximately the same area as the circle, but every other version of the Elantra will have exactly what you see here. I think Hyundai's done a great job with the ambient lighting strip. You can see it right there, just above that bottom run of chrome across the dashboard. It goes right from the air vents there in the center console across to the air vent right there on the passenger side. As with the bulk of the competition, we do have a continuously variable automatic transmission under the hood, but this is going to imitate stepped ratios as you accelerate, very much like we see in the Nissan, the Toyota, or the Honda competition. But a little bit more like the Honda and a little bit less like the Corolla and Nissan, this shifts ratios faster than we find, especially in that Nissan Sentra. So it's going to feel a little bit more like a traditional automatic transmission when passing people. The relatively quick downshift, like you see right there, is pretty similar to an 8 or a 9-speed automatic transmission out there. It definitely has a pleasing feel to it, but when accelerating, I really wish this would just vary the ratios and hang out at a high RPM, because it would probably get 0 to 60 a little bit faster. Now, this is still a little faster than the Corolla. In my 0 to 60 testing, this went 0 to 60 in 7.9 seconds. So that's not quite as fast as the Civic, but that's definitely ahead of what we see in the Corolla. In terms of the 60 to 0 stopping distance, this model took 120 feet. Now, I will caution you that the road was a little bit moist. It may be difficult to see out on camera, but it has been raining this entire week. And fortunately, when I was able to do the 60 to 0 and 0 to 60 testing, it was drier than it is now, but it wasn't perfectly dry. The 0 to 60 time could be a little bit faster because there is a little bit of wheel slip at the beginning. Every manufacturer out there seems to have a preferred method for trying to expand the ratio of their transmission from the lowest gear ratio to the highest gear ratio possible. Hyundai chose just to broaden the ratios in the CVT rather than adding an extra physical gear like we find in the Toyota setup, or a 2-speed transmission like we find in some Nissan transmissions. When it comes to handling, I'm going to give this an A. The Elantra reminds me an awful lot out on the road of the Honda Civic. The way the car drives, the way that it feels in the corners, the fact that the body is very stable and very planted reminds me an awful lot of that Honda model, and a little bit less of the Mazda 3. The Mazda 3 has a little bit more tip and dive, a little bit more body roll just due to the tuning of its suspension, but the Mazda 3 has easily the best steering feel in this segment. We simply get more feedback from the front tires to the driver. Now, that doesn't mean that the Mazda 3 is actually going to grip the road any better, and you'll really notice that on broken pavement. If the pavement is smooth, the Mazda 3 does just fine. But the lack of an independent rear suspension means that under certain situations, the Mazda 3's rear suspension can get a little bit upset and it can feel like it's chattering across the pavement. We don't see that in the Elantra. And that actually surprised me a bit because this Elantra does not actually have an independent rear suspension. You'll find that in the hybrid model, the N-Line, and the N, but oddly enough, not in the Elantra that I'm driving today. Out on a rougher road like the one that I'm on here, the ride quality is very comparable to the Corolla and the Civic. Honestly, the Corolla, the Civic, the Forte, and the Elantra are all very, very similar in the way that these manufacturers have decided to tune the suspension. Now, that shouldn't surprise you too much between this and the Kia Forte because Hyundai and Kia are, of course, sister brands. But in this generation of the Corolla, Toyota really stepped up their game and they really improved the driving dynamics and just the overall dynamics of the suspension. It doesn't get as upset as previous generations of the Corolla used to on broken pavement. That's really, really noticeable out on a rougher road like I'm on here. In my cabin noise test at 50 miles an hour, this scored 72.5 decibels, so that is a little bit louder than some of the competition. It mainly seems to be road noise coming from the rear. It's not quite as isolated as we find in, for instance, the Honda Civic or the Honda Insight. Fuel economy, on the other hand, has been absolutely excellent. This model has been averaging nearly 37 miles per gallon over a week of mixed driving, and the EPA rating on this particular model is 35. So even though the EPA rating on this trim is a little bit below what we find in the Honda Civic, we've actually been getting about the same kind of fuel economy. You can definitely thank the relatively new engine under the hood and the CVT for that. This engine has the ability to run on the Atkinson cycle. That's a modified Otto cycle that effectively trades torque for improved fuel economy. We see something very similar in most hybrids on the market. Bottom lining the Elantra out on the road is pretty easy. We definitely get a little bit more engine noise than we find in some of the competition, but we get reasonable acceleration. Definitely an improvement over what we find in the Toyota Corolla. Handling and handling feel have also been improved over the previous generation of the Elantra, and this is now among the best in this segment. And of course, if you want even better handling and better performance, there are a variety of additional Elantras to choose from. I think my favorite happens to be the Elantra Hybrid. Hopefully I'll have a separate video on that coming up very soon. Now let's dive into the pricing. For 2021, there are going to be a ton of different ways you can get your Elantra. It's going to start in base SE form at $19,650. If you're not interested in the hybrid or the performance versions, then it's going to top out in the limited trim, which will start at $25,450. You'll notice that that price range is a little bit narrower than something like a Honda Civic. One of the reasons is because all of the regular versions of the Elantra use exactly the same engine. We don't find a two-engine lineup in the mainstream version. However, of course, there is that hybrid model. If you want that, that's going to be $23,550. That's about $3,000 more than the regular SEL trim. If you want to start into the performance versions of the Elantra, the N-Line, formerly the Sport model, is going to be $24,100, and I don't know exactly how much the full-on N will be, but you can expect that to start around $30,000 or perhaps a little bit more. With the Elantra lineup, there are a few things to keep in mind. Although it does have a low sticker price, it doesn't come standard with LED headlights, which you do find in some of the competition. But we have an 8-inch infotainment system with wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto standard. On the other hand, a Qi wireless charging mat is not standard, so CarPlay may be wireless, but charging your phone is not in that particular model. Also keep in mind that if you choose the up-level 10.25-inch infotainment screen, then you lose the wireless CarPlay functionality. With sedan sales being on a general decline in North America, we don't have too many compact sedans anymore to choose from. The main ones are the Corolla, the Civic, the Elantra in the top 3, and then the Jetta rounds out the top 4. You can expand the pool out a little bit if you want to include entries like the Honda Insight, which is really just a hybrid Civic, but we don't really have any entries from the American competitors here, so there is really no compact Ford or compact Chevy or compact Chrysler sedan or Dodge sedan to choose from. Obviously, the first competitor has to be the bestseller in this segment, the Toyota Corolla. It starts a little bit more at $19,925, but you'll get more standard active safety technologies on that Corolla. Toyota's decided to make adaptive cruise control and a number of their other key technologies standard on every single model in the lineup, including the Corolla, and that means it's a really good value if you're simply comparing base model to base model. That advantage starts to disappear as you start looking at the upper end trims of the Corolla versus the Elantra, because you are going to find those tech features on the Elantra, but you will have to decide whether you want features like the bigger LCD touchscreen or you want adaptive cruise control in your base model. As with the Elantra, the Corolla is not terribly speedy. If you want something with a little bit more pep, a little bit more performance, especially in mid-level trims, you probably want to take a look at the Honda Civic with the available 1.5-liter turbo. Toyota recently released an Apex version of the Corolla, but it's not a corollary to the N-Line or the N-Performance versions of the Elantra because you don't get any extra power. It's mainly a handles better, looks better package for the Corolla. Now, admittedly, handling in the Corolla is already pretty good, so the Apex package does make the Corolla an awful lot of fun. It's just not going to make it any faster. Next up, we have the Honda Civic. The most important thing to know about the Civic is that it's getting completely replaced soon. So in this video, I'm talking about the current generation Civic. That would be the Civic sedan, coupe, and hatchback. Now, the coupe has been officially discontinued. You may still find some on dealer lots. If you want an inexpensive coupe, it's basically your only option. The sedan is getting redesigned for 2022. The hatch will likely follow shortly thereafter, but it's not going to be an overly square hatch. It's still going to be a liftback or sportback style profile, very similar to what we see in the current generation Civic. With the current generation Civic, the big thing to know is that the 1.5-liter turbo is the engine that you'll find under the mid-level and upper-end trims of the regular Civic. And I'm not talking about the Civic Si or, of course, the Civic Type R, just the regular old Civic. And that model is quite simply going to be one of the fastest compact sedans outside of something like the Elantra N-Line. I really love the fact that Honda put that 1.5-liter turbo in the Civic, and it quite simply makes it the most fun entry as long as we're not talking about the performance options. Honda also, I think, has the best CVT in this bunch. Now, some people might say that that's like saying the best cup of coffee in England, but it is still the best CVT. The big difference is how quickly it shifts ratios. If you're trying to pass someone and you just floor the vehicle, it downshifts much more rapidly, especially than the Nissan CVT. The Toyota one does pretty well. It has that physical second gear, which gives it a little bit more of a definite start, but in downshift maneuvers, it's not going to be as fast as the Honda CVT. And I think that the new one that we find in the Hyundai lineup comes in second to what we see in the Honda. Fuel economy is also pretty good with that 1.5-liter Civic Turbo. Unfortunately, there have been a few reliability concerns with that 1.5-liter engine. So if you're really concerned about reliability in your compact sedan, you might want to stick with the Elantra or the Corolla. Next up, we have the Volkswagen Jetta, which really sells on size. It has a big back seat, it has a relatively upright interior, and a big trunk. If you're looking for a compact sedan with really more of a traditional sedan look and sedan profile, that's going to be the Volkswagen Jetta. The Jetta is also very inexpensive. It starts at $18,995, making it even less expensive than the Hyundai. But there's an important thing to keep in mind. It doesn't come with an automatic transmission. On the other hand, if you want a manual transmission, it is one of the few options to choose from. If you want the automatic, however, and most folks probably will, that's going to be $20,790. But it is a real automatic transmission. It's not a CVT. So if you're looking for a compact sedan and you want a Japanese-built 8-speed automatic, that's going to be the Volkswagen Jetta. Interestingly enough, that's essentially the same 8-speed auto that we find in a variety of Toyota models. That's because Volkswagen uses Aisin transmissions, just like Toyota does. Now, on the downside, the interior does not feel nearly as nice or as special as the current generation Hyundai Elantra or the new Nissan Sentra. And because of the relatively slow sales that we see in the Jetta, there aren't as many options and different trim levels to choose from as you'll find in other vehicles in the Volkswagen lineup. On the other hand, I really do like the 1.4-liter turbocharged engine that we find in that model. It's not terribly peppy, it's not terribly powerful, but it has a really nice power delivery, and the 8-speed automatic transmission is a really good pairing to that. With that out of the way, let's dive into the Nissan Sentra. The Sentra is one of the newest entries in this segment, and I have to say I really like the design. They've definitely done a good job of shrinking the design that we find in the Nissan Altima and making it look good in this smaller form. Nissan has lately decided to make basically all their vehicles look the same, and so far this design works relatively well, whether we're talking about the Nissan Versa, the Sentra, the Altima, or of course the Maxima, although I don't think the Maxima wears the corporate nose quite as well. The main selling points for the Elantra are a well-designed interior. I think it's very comfortable, it's very functional. I also like the design. The way that the infotainment system is set into the dashboard design itself is very attractive. The seats are very comfortable, the fuel economy is high, and there are a ton of deals on the dealer lot. Theoretically, it starts at $19,410, undercutting the Elantra a little bit, but most likely you're going to be getting a lot more cash on the hood of the Sentra than you will on the Elantra. At the moment, the Sentra also has a slightly narrower price range than most of the competition. It stops at about $25,300. There's no turbocharged option, there's no performance option, there's no hybrid option of this model. Instead, Nissan has decided to double down on being comfortable and easy to live with. Bottom line, which sedan is right for you will really depend a lot on your priorities. The Corolla does an excellent job of being a great base model value. It has standard LED headlights, it has a really good reputation for reliability and dependability. Now, those base LED headlights are not terribly bright. They're not my favorite LED headlight, but they are standard and they will last an awful long time. If you want better fuel economy, there's a hybrid version of the Corolla, but most folks would probably do better just getting one of the base models of Prius, to be honest, if you're looking for a Corolla hybrid. I would say something similar goes on with the Elantra. If you're looking at the Elantra hybrid, I think that you would do better taking a look at the Ioniq. It's going to be a better, more practical vehicle overall, but it's not going to feel quite as new as the hybrid Elantra. The Sentra is cheap, efficient, and practical. The Honda Civic is an awful lot of fun to drive, but the infotainment system is certainly very, very dated. The Elantra, I think, does really well across the board. It's very practical, it's comfortable, it's easy to live with, it's well priced, it has a long standard warranty, and reliability has been excellent. So if you don't need the backseat room that we find in the Volkswagen Jetta, and you're willing to give a little bit of reliability, and I'm talking about a very, very tiny amount of reliability up versus the Corolla, the Elantra is going to be an absolutely excellent option. And if you're looking for more fun, the N-Line and the N models of the Elantra are really intriguing, but I'll talk about those in a separate video. Let me know what you would get if you're shopping in this segment down there in the comment section below. And of course, check out the merch store because you can find shirts right like this one with a poodle that has paddle shifters on them. Why? You'll find that out over at aoamerch.com. I'll see all of you later.